Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 150. It's my party and I'll cry if I want to. Things had been different ever since he talked to Shinso. They'd been better. Shinso still had that angry furrow to his brow every once in a while, but it never stayed for long. He'd been living with Mike and Eraser for about a month now, and he had his friend back, plus 3 new friends. It all felt too good to be true. Sure, there was still a massive looming threat over his head at all times, but that wasn't really new for him. If he didn't think about that or the fact that he was living with his teachers or most of his past, then he almost felt normal. He felt like one of his peers. It was such a foreign feeling, belonging. Shinso had asked him over to hang out this weekend, and Izuku was almost giddy at how utterly mundane the offer was. Just hanging out at a friend's house, like teenagers do. He's not sure what he had expected of that invitation, but it certainly wasn't this. Surprise! The sudden noise and presence of far more people than he had expected scared him half to death, and he dragged Shinso most of the way back down the hall toward the door before he realized that he knew these people and everything was fine. Probably. Shinso-san, Ida, Uraraka, and Todoroki were all standing in the dining room with a banner hung on the wall behind them that read, "Happy Birthday." He damn near had a second heart attack thinking that he had missed Shinso's birthday before he remembered what day it was. It was his birthday. They were all here for him, and they were all looking at him with concerned expressions, likely because he was staring blankly at them and still holding half of Shinso's weight as he tried to get them both away from the threat in the other room. Shinso hit the ground with a loud thump. "Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I thought, quit throwing me around," Shinso interrupted his fractured apology as Izuku quickly pulled him back up to his feet. Maybe a little too quickly. "Sorry," he apologized again. Uraraka, giggling from the other room, broke the awkward tension of the moment. "So I guess we actually pulled off the surprise part?" she asked a little nervously. He didn't have the wherewithal to do anything but stand there like a gaping fish. "I believe he is more than suitably surprised," Ida answered for him. He didn't know what to say. He hardly knew what to think. All he knew was that he felt bad, like he had done something wrong. Why did they do all of this? There were presents wrapped up on the table, and there were decorations hung around the room, and Shinso must have asked everyone over even though he barely knew them. Why did they do that? Oh gosh, everyone was looking at him. "Why don't you guys go take a seat in the living room? Toshi, you can show everyone how to play Mario Kart or something. Have some fun. I'm going to get started on dinner. I hope you don't mind Katsudon again, kiddo. 2 times in as many weeks, you might get sick of it." Shinso-san interrupted his rapidly mounting internal breakdown. "You're not going to teach me how to play Mario Kart. I'm going to teach you how to eat my dust." Uraraka chimed in with her very particular brand of charming intimidation. Well, at least it seemed like she was getting along better with Shinso. Izuku had not missed the pointed glare she sent his way when he wasn't paying attention. He wanted to explain that he was the one in the wrong, not Shinso, but he really didn't want to get into it with her, and she hadn't been unwelcoming toward him anyway, at least not outwardly. "What's Mario Kart?" Todoroki asked. Even Ida looked at him funny for that one. Still, he started explaining it in great detail, completely missing the little smirk on Todoroki's face as he did so. With all the emotions suddenly foisted upon him, Izuku couldn't help but laugh. It was rare that Todoroki made a joke, but that just made them even funnier when he did. Ida's incredibly earnest explanation of Mario Kart went unfinished as everyone laughed along with him. Well played, Todoroki. But you do actually know how the game works? Ida asked, only mildly put out that he didn't get the chance to finish his explanation. No, I don't, Todoroki admitted. Ida was more than happy to fill him in with a few interjections from Shinso and Uraraka as they booted up the game. Izuku was still reeling a bit, but not nearly as much as he had been at first. He took the seat closest to the exit like a child clutching a safety blanket and hoped that no one would notice. Shinso only had 2 controllers, so they all took turns playing. As was to be expected, it wasn't much of a competition. He, Todoroki, and Ida couldn't place above 8th to save their lives, but Uraraka and Shinso were constantly flipping back and forth between 1st and 2nd place. Watching them fight was honestly more entertaining than playing the game. Todoroki and Ida seemed to agree because they were on their 5th rematch when Izuku finally plucked up the courage to excuse himself for a moment. Shinso-san was still in the kitchen preparing dinner when he left the living room. Don't even offer to help, mister. I'm not having it. Not today, she warned him playfully before he got the chance to open his mouth. She knew him well. Seen. He felt seen. That's why he was so uncomfortable. He wasn't supposed to be seen. It wasn't safe. Being seen led to being caught, and the wild prey animal at the core of his being was telling him to run while he still had the chance. Too much going on in there? Shinso-san asked when he failed to speak. He tried to remind himself that she was safe, that she was allowed to see him, but it still felt like a rabbit was kicking at the walls of his rib cage in an attempt to escape. These were his friends, for heaven's sake. Why was he panicking more than he would if someone came at him with a knife in a dark alleyway? He nodded in response to Shinso-san before he got too lost in his thoughts again. Why don't you take a seat? It sounds like they'll be entertaining themselves for a while yet, she replied with a soft, knowing smile. He hesitantly took the offer. He felt like he needed to go back in there. They had thrown this party for him. He needed to participate in it. But he had already excused himself, so it would be weird to go back now. He had planned to hide in the bathroom for a few minutes, but he might as well sit here. He had no pretenses to maintain with her anyway. It's all right to be overwhelmed, kiddo. You've spent a long time hiding away, but you don't need to do that anymore. No one's expecting you to adjust right away either. It's going to take time, and there's nothing wrong with that. He must have lost his touch with evading her notice. She didn't wait for him to say anything. She just went back to what she had been doing, thus taking any of the pressure he'd felt to force out a response. She was way too kind, too thoughtful. He could never even hope to pay her back for everything she had done for him. That sentiment was becoming more and more prevalent in his life. There were too many people giving, and he would never get the chance to catch up to them. Every good deed felt like another weight added onto his shoulders. I have a feeling that it is about to be very loud. Todoroki announced his presence from the entryway to the living room before grabbing a seat at the table next to Izuku. Uraraka has had a blue shell for the last 2 laps, and she has yet to use it. Izuku felt like laughing and crying in equal measure. Did Todoroki come in here just to warn him? He must have heard him talking to Shinso-san. The warning came not a second too early, too. Shinso was shouting before Todoroki even fully settled in the chair. You're dead to me! Izuku snorted out a laugh, which was completely drowned out by Uraraka's cackling. Uraraka, that was very unsportsmanly, he heard Ida chastise, though it didn't have any bite to it because A, he was clearly holding back his own laughter, and B, he hadn't warned Shinso either. Do I need to confiscate the Wii before the TV becomes a casualty? Shinso-san joked. No, Ida made sure that the wrist straps were being used properly. Todoroki answered flatly. Like most of the things Todoroki said, Izuku wasn't sure whether he had meant that as a joke or not, but both he and Shinso-san were laughing regardless and Todoroki didn't seem to mind. Why don't you two go wash your hands? I'm almost done here, and it'll be easier if you aren't all waiting in line for a turn at the sink. Shinso-san prompted them, nodding toward the bathroom down the hall. They did as instructed, and the other three were waiting for them in the dining room when they returned. Shinso was patting his hands dry on a towel from the kitchen, and Ida and Uraraka swapped with him and Todoroki, not brave enough to risk getting in Shinso-san's way as she moved around the kitchen. She reluctantly allowed Izuku to help set the table, as he was the only other person who knew where everything went besides Shinso. Ida and Uraraka came back shortly and politely thanked the three of them for dinner, which was delicious, as always. Just as he was starting to worry that the meal was going to be ruined by awkward silence, someone spoke up. You have a lovely house, Shinso-san, a backyard and everything, in the city. Uraraka remarked to make small talk. Oh, yeah, it's wonderful. We're never selling it. It's an old family house from my husband's side, so it's been paid off since before I was your age. We're very lucky to have it, Shinso-san replied. He'd always wondered how they could afford this place on a single income, but he had been too awkward to ask about it. He had a feeling it had something to do with Mr. Shinso and figured it was none of his business. Oh, you have a swing on the tree out there? That's so cute. Uraraka pivoted the conversation away from the obvious elephant in the room. My dad made the swing. Shinso pivoted right back with a little smirk on his face that told Izuku that he was messing with Uraraka on purpose. What had happened since the last time he'd seen those two that brought them close enough to so amicably be at each other's throats? It was broken for years. One of the ropes came untied and we didn't have a ladder. I told Greenie that, like the second time you came over? We were obviously friends by this point, but we didn't know each other super well, so you can imagine my surprise when he wall jumps up our fence to get up to the branch it was tied to and fixes it like it was nothing. Shinso reminisced on something less touchy and saved them all from the conversational pit he'd dangled them over in the first place. You wall jumped up our fence? Shinso-san butted in. The swing, and I could, he sputtered out a weak justification. That branch is at least 15 feet up, Shinso-san interjected. Hey, in his defense, you said we weren't allowed to maim each other. You said nothing about maiming ourselves, so he was behaving well within the parameters you set out for us, Shinso argued, gesturing accusatorially with his chopsticks as he did so. Oh my gosh, she grumbled under her breath as she pinched the bridge of her nose in frustration. Izuku risked a glance around the table. Ida was looking out the window, leaning forward so that he could see how high off the ground the branch was, with a vaguely impressed expression. Todoroki was smiling softly as he listened to their shenanigans, and Shinso and Uraraka were both visibly struggling to hold back their laughter. Oh, I see how it is. It's all permitted when he's the one suplexing me through the crust of the earth, but the second he's at risk, suddenly it's too dangerous. Shinso jabbed again sarcastically. Obviously, yes. He's my favorite son. I can't have him getting hurt, Shinso's son shot back without missing a beat. Shinso gasped dramatically in mock offense, and Shinso-san full belly laughed in response. Shinso-san, you can't get upset with him. 15 feet is nothing. My parents once got called to my pre-K class because the teacher lost track of me, and they found me on the roof puking my guts out because I learned the hard way that I can use my quirk on myself. Uraraka added her 2 cents. Shinso-san gasped and covered her mouth with her hand, but everyone else was laughing with varying amounts of horror, so she broke down and joined them. If you're gonna be mad at one of us for climbing too high, it should be Shinso. He was dangling from the rafters in the gym last week. Izuku brought the conversation back to the present before Todoroki started chiming in with childhood anecdotes. That would certainly be an even worse mood shift than the topic of Mr. Shinso was. Was this one of Aizawa-san's, quote, murder attempts? She asked with a raised brow. Yes, one of many. Shinso scoffed. The rest of the meal was filled with the same free-flowing conversation that settled warmly in his chest. Part of him was still reeling, trying to insist that none of this was worth the effort, but the rest of him had never felt more honored to be where he was. Unfortunately, the former part of him took over once the dishes were stacked in the sink and the gifts that had been on the table were brought out again. Izuku had been trying his best not to think about this part. Barring the cat plushie from Shinso and the throwing knives from Eraser, he hadn't gotten a gift since he turned 4. Well, did One for All count? Probably. Regardless, he didn't know what the procedure was for opening gifts besides saying thank you. It was already uncomfortable being the center of attention. Having to accept handouts on top of that wasn't his idea of a good time. Those knives and that plushie were kind of his prized possessions, though. Maybe the receiving part was supposed to be bad, and it was just an unspoken rule that you had to act grateful in the moment, and then you get to be actually grateful later. Unfortunately for him, that moment was now. Shinso was the first to shove a gift into his hands and look at him expectantly. Izuku took as subtle of a deep breath as he could and pulled the tissue paper out of the bag, grabbing the first thing he saw, a spiral-bound sketchbook. The pages were nice and smooth, hot-pressed, not too heavy, but much thicker than the composition notebooks he was used to. He ran his fingers over the faux leather cover and bit his lip. He felt like crying. He didn't know how to respond. There's more stuff in the bottom. Shinso helpfully spoke up. He choked out, thank you, and fished his hand back into the bag until he found something. A pencil. A nice mechanical one with an all-metal casing and one of those replaceable erasers. There were 3 sizes of that, 0.5, 0.7, and 0.9 millimeters or something. I figured they'd all be useful for different things, and they'll last you forever because you can replace the erasers too, Shinso explained. Sure enough, there were 2 more pencils and a pack of eraser replacements at the bottom of the bag as well. One of these pencils probably cost more than every writing utensil he owned, sans the pens he had stolen from Eraser. Those were nice pens. He should probably give those back. Should be one more thing. Shinso's voice called him back. Izuku reached his hand back into the bag without giving himself time to think about it. Thinking about it was only making it worse. This was all so overwhelming. He pulled the last item out, but he didn't recognize what it was, and the confusion must have shown on his face. It's double-sided tape. People use it for scrapbooking, I think. It works like those whiteout dispensers, the non-liquid ones. You just drag it across the back of something and it sticks tape to it. Then you can just slap it on whatever else. I know you have old notebooks and stuff. Thought it might be nice to use the new paper, but not leave a notebook half full, Shinso explained. Izuku wasn't sure how successful he had been with keeping his emotions off of his face. He knew his expression had to be neutral at best. He hadn't even been thinking about putting on a smile and acting grateful. He'd been too busy focusing on not crying. Now, however, he knew he was failing epically. He clenched his lips between his teeth in an effort to stop the trembling, and he could feel his brows furrow, but he couldn't move them back up to a more neutral position. Thanks, he forced out, though his breath caught on the single word. Yeah, no problem, Greenie. I hope you like them, Shinso replied with a bittersweet smile. All right, time for the next one. What'd you boys get him? Shinso-san interrupted the moment to save him from his own thoughts. This is from both of us, Ida announced, pushing an even bigger gift bag across the table toward him, and Shinso-kun in spirit as well. I just gave you some advice. That doesn't make the gift from me, Shinso argued. That's why I said in spirit. We had no clue what to get him. Your contribution was invaluable, Todoroki insisted. Shinso put his hands up in mock surrender before gesturing for him to actually open it. Just like the other bag, this one seemed to have several things in it, but they were all wrapped up in more tissue paper, so he couldn't tell what was what. He just grabbed the one on top. It was a copy of the game they were just playing, Mario Kart. But it looked like a newer version. It seemed like Shinso didn't give them very good advice because he had nothing to play this on. Oh, thanks, guys, he replied, unsure of how he was meant to respond to the situation. I should have put that on the bottom. Open the big one, Ida instructed. Izuku didn't like where this was going. Surely, there's no way. They wouldn't spend so much money on him. They'd only known each other for a few months. There's no way. They got him a Switch. You guys have to return this, he insisted with a voice more level than he had expected to come out of his mouth. Is it broken? Todoroki asked, sitting up straighter in his chair to get a better look. No, I can't, it's too much. Come on, Midoriya. You need to practice if you're ever going to beat me and Shinso. Uraraka interrupted him. It's a different system. I will dominate the Wii version until the day I die, Shinso insisted. So are you already dead, or did I misremember that last round? She shot back. The two of them started arguing back and forth about cheating versus strategy, but it all sounded like static to him. How expensive were these things? Tens of thousands of yen, surely. He couldn't accept this. It was too much. His hands were shaking. My parents got me one for my birthday a few years ago, and I hardly ever used it. But you can play that game online. We could play together from our own homes. I am usually free from 7 to 9 p.m. on weekdays. Ida offered him over the background noise of bickering. I'm pretty sure Natsu has one. Maybe I could join occasionally, Todoroki added. It felt wrong to just give in, but he didn't have any valid argument to deny them. That sounds good. Thank you, he forced himself to stutter out. Enough, you're both pretty girls. Shinso-san cut off the other two arguing. It's my turn. Here you go, kiddo, she said as she set down a crookedly wrapped box. A book, maybe? By this point, his brain felt like mush, so he just peeled back the tape and let the paper fall away from the object. It was a 3-ring binder that had little stylistic doodles of food on it. There was no label on the front, so he opened it up in search of an explanation. On the inside, there were tabs listing various food groups. He opened it up to a random page to find it filled with Shinso-san's neat scrawl. It was a recipe book. My parents gave me one as a graduation present. It's a bit early for that, but I thought you'd like it anyway. My katsudan is on the first page. It's got all the family recipes in it, so don't go spilling our secrets, all right? Shinso-san warned with a smirk that told him that she really didn't care all too much about secrets. He's not sure if his hands had stopped shaking in the first place, but they were shaking now, so much that he couldn't read the words on the page right in front of him. Or, no, everything was blurry, not just the book. Damn it, he was crying. Oh, I've gone and done it now. Come here, sweetheart. He heard Shinso-san talking as he was pulled into a hug. He tried not to think about the gesture behind giving him a book of her family's recipes, ones that had been passed down from parent to child. But he wasn't very successful. He thought about how he had learned to cook on his own, about all the admittedly subpar meals he had made for his mother that had gone untouched in the fridge because she was never home. He remembered when he had decided to stop trying to cook for two because she didn't leave enough money for that. He remembered how he started cooking again after All Might had forced groceries on him. He remembered sharing what he made with both him and Eraser. Food had always been an incredibly isolating subject for him, It was the necessity that forced him out of the safety of his room or into the danger of the cafeteria. It wasn't a comfort, and it never had been until he met Shinso-san, Eraser, and All Might. He remembered how warm he had felt the first time he had stayed over for dinner. The katsudon she had made nourished him in ways he could never replicate on his own. And now she was giving him that power, the power to take their home with him. He had to stop thinking about it. He forced his thoughts down, pried himself from her gentle embrace, and scrubbed the tears off his face. Thank you, Shinso-san. This means a lot. I just thank you. He forced his voice as steady as he could manage. Of course, kiddo. You can always come over here if you can't get the recipe quite right, she said with a wink, and he knew she really meant that. He didn't know what he did to deserve all of them in his life, but he was so incredibly grateful for it. Well, I'm afraid that my present isn't as exciting. But it's not a party without a cake, right? Uraraka spoke up from behind him. He hadn't even noticed her move to the kitchen through his minor breakdown. Shinso-san and I made this together. I think she put the recipe in the book, she continued as she walked back to the table with a covered cake tray. I just printed out the one we used. It's not a family recipe, so it doesn't get the full archival treatment. But I figured if it's any good, you might want to keep it. My own recipe book is half printouts anyway. Shinso-san replied, stage whispering the last bit, as if it were a shameful secret. Privately, he was glad that Uraraka hadn't gotten him another gift like everyone else. He's not sure his heart could take it. The cake was for everyone, so it was easier. Plus, he knew that she wasn't particularly well off. He would have felt awful if she had felt like she needed to spend whatever money she did have on him. He neatly slotted all of the gifts he had been given into the big bag that Todoroki and Ida's present had come in, and let Uraraka set the cake on the table in front of him. The moment he saw it, he felt like the whole world turned sideways, like something had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart into stillness. When he finally managed to peel his eyes away from the cake, everyone was looking at him. Strawberry? He stuttered out dumbly. Yeah, it's strawberry shortcake with cream cheese frosting, Uraraka confirmed with a hesitant smile. How did you know that? He cut himself off. Uraraka was looking at Shinso and nervously chewing at her lip. Your dad said you liked strawberries. Is that you aren't allergic or anything, right? Shinso explained awkwardly. No, my mom used to get me the same thing before. He clicked his jaw shut. They didn't need to know anything else. They could gather more than he would have liked already. All the tears he had been forcing down for the last 20 minutes or so were choking him, so he cleared his throat. It's my favorite, he reassured Uraraka, though his watery eyes and shaky timbre probably weren't helping his case. Oh, good, she replied. She said it in a way that told him he had made everyone uncomfortable. Too much faux cheer, as if she was trying to lift the mood back up. He hated it. He hated what he was doing, and he hated what they were doing for him. He clearly wasn't worth it, seeing as though he'd gone and ruined it several times. He tried to apologize, but to his horror, the single syllable turned into a sob. He quickly covered his mouth. Jeez, he was 16 years old and crying in front of all his friends at his birthday party like a toddler. Midoriya had been overwhelmed since the moment he first walked into the dining room and saw everyone there. Kohaku had felt him routinely pushing the emotion down throughout the night. She knew that he would reach a breaking point. She just wished that he would have had the chance to do so privately. She could sense how guilty Uraraka felt as well. It's not your fault, sweetheart, she whispered to the girl with a hopefully reassuring shoulder pat. Just as she turned her attention back to Midoriya, he got to his feet and stopped to say something, but decided against it and settled on gesturing for them to give him a minute before walking down the hall and into the bathroom. That poor kid. She looked back at the group of kids still with her, and it was difficult to tell who was feeling what. Uraraka and Toshi both felt pretty guilty. Someone felt confused and concerned, and someone else felt angry. Given their expressions, she had to assume that it was Ida and Todoroki, respectively. She hadn't expected anger. That was interesting. He wasn't angry at Midoriya, she could tell that much, so he must be angry for him. How much did he know about the situation? I fear I may be out of the loop. Ida spoke up, looking around at everyone else. Don't worry about it, Ida. Just give him a minute. I don't know what's going on either, but it's not our business. Uraraka answered before Kohaku could find the words to explain what was going on without giving anything away. Ah, my apologies, he replied, seeming rather deflated. It's all right, kiddo. I know you just want to help. Kohaku placated quickly. I'll tell you what I told Uraraka earlier. He's been through a lot. You shouldn't ask about it. And there's not anything more you can do to help. Mom, do you think one of us should... Toshi stepped in, nodding his head toward where Midoriya had gone, and wordlessly finishing the question he had left unasked. I'll check on him in a minute. He's too overwhelmed right now. I probably should have said this earlier. My quirk lets me feel other people's emotions, and I can't turn it off. She answered and explained to the rest of them. No one seemed offended, so she would take that as a win. She didn't want to drop the bomb of the rest of her quirk on them right now. Hopefully, Toshi wouldn't mind. Everyone was uncomfortable enough as it was. Singing happy birthday and everything is going to be too much. Why don't you guys cut this up now? We can take something off his plate and replace it with cake, she said with a smile. They all seemed like the type to feel better if they had something to do, so she left them to it. She excused herself to wait outside the bathroom door until Midoriya had calmed down a bit, but after a couple minutes of it only getting worse, she went ahead and knocked. Midoriya, it's me, sweetheart. Can I come in? There was no audible response, but the pang of loneliness she felt told her that he could use some company. Thankfully, the door was unlocked. At first, she thought he wasn't in there at all, but as she walked into the room, she realized he had stuck himself behind the door. He was sitting on the floor with his legs pulled up to his chest, his face buried in his knees, and his arms holding his shins as close to himself as he could manage. His shoulders were shaking like he was crying, but his unsteady breaths were the only thing she could hear. Sorry. She barely heard him apologize, voice muffled by his legs. No one's mad at you, and that's not an empty reassurance, not coming from me, she said as she knelt down in front of him and shut the door. He didn't seem very reassured. You wouldn't be mad if this happened with any of them, would you? She pressed. No, of course I don't want it to be like this. Everything was normal. I just wanted to be... He cut himself off with a muffled sob. Her heart broke for him. He just wanted to be normal. She knew that feeling well. Did Toshi ever tell you what happened to his dad? She asked. The subject change caught him off guard enough to look up at her. His eyes were red and puffy from crying, and tears were still streaming down his cheeks. He shook his head. He was killed. A hate crime because of his quirk. We were out for Toshi's birthday when it happened. Neither of us have been able to bring ourselves to celebrate our birthday since, she explained. I don't say that to make you feel bad. I just want you to know that normal is relative, and true normal is not nearly as common as you think. Everyone has their own stuff going on, and I know for a fact that no one here is upset with you, only upset for you. You shouldn't have had to go through all of the things that you went through, but you did, and it's okay to not be okay because of it. I'm so sorry. That's terrible. Yeah, it was. But it was ages ago. There's nothing to be done about it now. Don't ignore everything else I just said, all right? You wouldn't expect me or Toshi to brush that off, and no one's expecting you to brush this off. He nodded in acknowledgement, but he didn't say anything. He just looked at the floor and chewed at his lip. He looked like he was mulling something over, so she gave him a minute. He would talk when he was ready. The first time the first time I thought she might have really left was my birthday. She used to leave a cupcake, strawberry shortcake with cream cheese frosting in the fridge. I didn't always see her, but there was always a cupcake. Might have been a few days off, but it was always there until it wasn't. How come she gets to ruin things when she's not even here? He asked weakly. She's got a track record with that, doesn't she? Kohaku replied a little bitterly. Thankfully, Midoriya laughed at the ill-advised joke. Yeah, she does. Well, this is no store-bought cupcake. It's a whole entire cake. And it's on the right day. Or at least I think it is. It's on the right day, right? She asked, hoping to bring a little levity. He upped out a laugh and nodded. Good. Otherwise, I would have to give Aizawa an earful next time I see him, she joked. Midoriya's eyebrows furrowed at that, and he looked back down at his knees. Did he have you do all this? He asked, barely loud enough for her to make out the words. He didn't twist our arms. We were glad to do it, but he did ask if we would. He cares an awful lot about you. I felt it myself. He's such a big softy, isn't he? Her reassurance prompted a wobbly smile, one that looked like it was threatening to turn into more tears. You deserve this, kiddo. The thoughtfulness and the effort. That is, not the having a breakdown on my bathroom floor. As expected, the comment resulted in a teary laugh. She was running out of things to say when the silence was interrupted by a commotion in the kitchen. Toshi was making a vaguely disgruntled argument that she couldn't really make out, and Uraraka seemed to be laughing at his expense, while Ida much more audibly reprimanded the two of them for making a mess. Well, it sounds like they found a way to entertain themselves again, she remarked. Shinso and Uraraka seem to be getting along, he replied as he scrubbed the tears from his eyes with a fond smile. Like a house on fire, yeah. I thought you two acted like siblings. I think I acquired a new kid tonight. You've got a track record with that, don't you? He parroted her words back to her. Yeah, I guess I do, she said with a surprised laugh. You need a minute, or are you ready to go see what sort of havoc they're wreaking? No point in waiting until my eyes aren't all puffy, I guess, he replied with a wry laugh. He got to his feet and helped her creaky old bones up too, but she didn't let him go without a hug. He had a lot of lost hugs to make up for, and she was going to do her part. She gave him a second to get as composed as he could on short notice, and then they walked out together. Kohaku was not at all surprised to see a piece of cake smushed across the table when they re-entered the room. What did you two do? She asked with a threateningly raised eyebrow. She shoved cake in my face, Toshi complained. The frosting in his hair and the dirty dish towel in his hand corroborated that claim, but the innocent look on Uraraka's face did not. The subject in question was sitting primly perched on one of the dining chairs with her legs crossed and daintily eating a forkful of her own slice of cake. I wouldn't do that. It's highly undignified, she defended in a put-on posh accent. I simply said we should taste the cake and make sure it was good enough for Midoriya, which it is. You're welcome. Midoriya's responding laughter was probably sweeter than Toshi's hair at the moment. She could tell they put this all on to make him laugh, so she couldn't be mad about the admittedly pretty small mess. They were good kids. They'd take care of each other. End of chapter.